Oftentimes as teachers, we find ourselves in lessons that speak more to us than they do to others. And I think God uses us that way. Right now, I'll share a few minutes on a topic that I was asked to teach on called listening. Prayer is not just about talking. And the focus, honestly, is more on listening than anything, and the impact it's had on me and some of the things that have drawn me to this discipline of listening. In our growth as followers of Jesus Christ, we have had to listen along the way. We spent much of our early life listening, learning from people who have been down the road we have yet to travel. But even if we came to Him later in life, like I did, we listened more than anything. And as time goes by, though, it's not as easy for us to listen because we feel we've heard it already, or we know it already, or the ones speaking is who we are, because we tend to speak more than we listen. We have more advice to share than we have to learn. But what did listening look like in the life of Jesus? I believe you can see that it was part of His rhythm. Many of us feel pulled today in all kinds of directions. The pressures of work, the personal challenges, the requirements on our time, on our finances, on our emotions, have many of us strung out, feeling like the demands are more than we can carry. So where am I to find time to listen? Jesus led a pretty hectic life, a lot of demands on Him, and I think if you compare our lives to His, you'll find nobody that had more demands on them than Jesus. But think about His life. Do you ever see Him or sense a hurried spirit or a hectic nature or the pressures of time getting to Jesus? I don't see it. Why is that? Because He had a rhythm to life. A rhythm that helped Him to settle in. Look for it the next time you read a gospel. He goes from large public gatherings to smaller groups to more intimate settings with just a few, then to one-on-one, and finally He retreats to time alone. Although we know whenever we're alone, we're not truly alone. And the same for Jesus. When He's alone, He's with God. But that pattern in His life and His ministry repeats itself. It's a rhythm that sustains Him. It's a rhythm that renews Him so that He can return to a public life, so He can return to discipling in smaller groups. And eventually He'll find Himself again alone with Jesus. It's a rhythm that I trust in. It's a rhythm that I have come to love as I've discovered more and more about it. And in that alone time, He listens. And I don't have time to unpack this list of scriptures that I want to share with you, but I leave them with you and share them with you so that you have a few to dig into that might help you in your pursuit of this discipline of listening and listening better. First of all, James 1:19 says this, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry." In this chaos of 2020, how much more sweet would our relationships be if we were slow to speak, Jeremiah 33:3, he says this, "Call to me and I will answer you and tell you great and unsearchable things you do not know." God calls us to speak out to him, and he will answer. Matthew 7:24, "Therefore everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock." You listen and you'll be called to action. There's obedience that follows listening. Romans 10:17. Consequently, faith comes from hearing the message, and the message is heard through the word about Christ. Your study, your reading is listening to the word of God. And then in Luke 10:38 through 42, we hear the story of Mary and Martha as they host Jesus. Mary gets it. She sits at the feet of Jesus to listen to him, forgetting the pomp and circumstance of hosting a Savior. She understands what he brings to that community, and she forgoes all of the niceties and listens to Jesus. She gets it. And then Jesus in Gethsemane, he listens with the help of his community. We'll touch more on that later. So all of these scriptures I share not as a proof text, but just give you places to go to discover what listening might look like, to discover that listening is modeled, it's asked of us, and it's critical in our witness and our growth as his children. So I ask this question: what is available when we take the time to listen and learn? In 1 Corinthians 2:1 through 16, I think two things stand out that have touched my heart about what's available to us, and that is the Spirit of God and the mind of Christ. A couple of highlights to share from that passage here. "And so it is with me, brothers and sisters, when I came to you, I did not come with eloquence or human wisdom as I proclaimed to you the testimony about God. For I resolved to know nothing while I was with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified." Verse 7, "No, we declare God's wisdom." The wisdom of God is available to me. We declare God's wisdom, a mystery that has been hidden and that God destined for our glory before time began. Further on in verse 10, "What no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, and what no human mind has conceived, the things God has prepared for those who love him." These are the things God has revealed to us by his Spirit. Moving on, verse 12, "What we have received is not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God." Is it clear that his Spirit is available to us? "The person without the Spirit does not accept the things that come from the Spirit of God, but considers them foolishness and cannot understand them because they are discerned only through the Spirit." In my time of quiet, I begin to discern that which the Spirit shows me, which I come to understand through the guidance of his Spirit. And the part that I love the most about this passage, the end to verse 16, "Who has known the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ." Really? I'm granted the Spirit of God and the mind of Christ, credited to me as righteousness, Paul tells us. These are available to me and you and this body we're a part of at Prestoncrest when we choose to listen. With the mind of Christ, should we not be the most creative, the most forward-thinking, the most out-of-the-box thinking? Individuals, when it comes to evangelism and discipling and worship and teaching with the mind of Christ, should we not be at the top of our game when it comes to this life of following Jesus? I think so. And I love that by listening, I'm tied into His Spirit and the mind of Christ. There are a lot of things to be said about listening, but I want to spend the next few minutes just on a couple of key points that strike me and speak to me. Number one, listening to and for God physically changes us. When we are listening, we are consuming. And what we consume has a physical effect and impact. It impacts our actions and our reactions. Mentally, what we listen to physically wires our brain's neural pathways. It physically changes the way our brain functions and operates. For addicts, doctors focus on changing those pathways. The brain is elastic enough that it can change. Listening to God can physically change my brain. What is the result of that? For me, what I've observed in those that are good at listening, and in myself when I have listened well to His Spirit, I find myself responding, reflecting, processing and engaging people and events with more of the fruits of the Spirit. I'm in a phase of life right now where the fruits of the Spirit just speak to me. It's what I want to come out of me. It's what I get so frustrated with myself about when I respond or react to a situation or an environment or a conversation that is not salted with the fruits of the Spirit. I read something interesting about the fruits of the Spirit recently from a passage by a book called Prayer Ways by Louis Savary and Patricia Burney. They explain that we tend to view the fruits of the Spirit as virtues, characteristics used to describe someone or someone's spiritual life or the way that they live. And while I understood that and understand that, this person's take and view was something I hadn't considered before. The idea that the fruits of the Spirit are sources of energy, like coal or wind or oil, that when processed and refined and worked through, turn into energy that creates results. Energy that we feed off of, energy that sustains us. Part of listening is our exploration, our discovery, our refining of the energy of those fruits. And what a different way for me to think about love and joy and peace, that there's energy in those. Jesus had an attractive spirit that drew you in, an energy that you felt, that you wanted to be a part of, that you wanted to experience. He exuded the fruits of the Spirit. And so I love that I now think of the fruits of the Spirit as a source of energy, not something that describes the kind of person that I am, but something that feeds me, something that feeds one another as we walk through life together. That energy can be used for His glory, for your witness, and for your discipling. Those are found and developed when we listen to Him. So number one, listening to and for God physically changes us and has an impact when we tap into the energy available to us. Number 2, listening involves community. And I could speak a lot on the importance of community, especially the one here at Prestoncrest. But go back to Jesus in Gethsemane. When he goes to pray, he takes all of the disciples, and then further along takes Peter, James, and John until he's by himself. And what does he ask of those 3? Watch over me while I pray. Jesus invites his community to help him listen. We should always be listening for God. Sometimes we have specific requests, big decisions to make in life, challenging things that we're going through, and we want to hear from God to understand what he might be saying to us. So often we call on others to intercede for us in prayer. How often do we call on one another to listen for me? What might God be saying to me? Where might God be leading me? Here's what I'm trying to listen for. Brothers and sisters, can you help me listen for where God might be leading me or what he might be saying to me? Use your community. Have them listen for you. This body described in Ephesians 4:16 grows and builds itself up in love as each part does its work. The body grows when we work with one another. Listening for one another is working with one another. But for this to be effective, those listening for you will listen better when they know you and know you deeply. A whole other lesson on the importance of building community and deeper relationships with one another here. But hear this, let yourself be known by this community. And it takes a boldness and an openness and a willingness to step out there. But allow yourself to be known by this community. Number 3, listening brings light to your darkness. Being quiet to listen to God will bring your whole view, your whole self into view. The good, the bad, and the ugly of who I am. And it takes courage to be quiet and listen, because when you are listening for him, the light shines in the darkness. And nothing can hide from the dark. Nothing can hide from the light. So I say with caution, be aware and beware. Silence and listening will bring your true self into view, and into view to be dealt with. Whether consciously or subconsciously, we find ways to fill our time so we don't have to face the reality of what's in front of us, or more importantly, what's inside of us. To slow down and deal with what we know is there can be scary. Hurts and wounds from the past will surface. Some that we have dealt with won't bring the pain they used to. In fact, we'll be in a place that we can walk with others that are going down a similar path. We can minister to them and be the hands and feet of Jesus as they walk a road we've walked before. But sometimes those things haven't been dealt with, and they will bring pain. No need to avoid it, just beware and ready for it and willing to deal with it. And can I make a plug here for counseling, for seeking professional help? Do it. If you feel a resistance, a stigma tied to professional counseling, fight it. Allow those gifted by God to use their gifts to bring healing to you and glory to God. These are reasons why knowing your body is so important. So I challenge you to build that community. I challenge you to create a place to share your story so you become known by others. One benefit is just the fact that you will have someone who will be able to listen well for you. Listening allows you to hear from God about yourself and how your story can bring glory to Him and light to others still hiding in the dark. So I close with this. Do you find yourself scratching your head when you look around our society today, wondering what has happened to us? If you take a step back, I think that you'll see both sides of the spectrum wonder the same thing. How has the left become so crazy? How has the right become so crazy? And both sides have ideas on how it should be or how it could be fixed, yet nothing seems to change. These echo chambers that we live in are harmful to our culture, to our witness, and to our growth as a nation and believers. How would an extended period of time, maybe months, of shutting out the noise of current events and social media, instead listening to spiritual, biblical, godly content, how would that change you and your impact on those around you? What would it do to you physically, emotionally, spiritually? How would it impact those that you work with and those that you live with and even those that we worship with here at Prestoncrest? What would leaving our echo chambers for an extended period of time do to us in the pursuit of the wisdom of God and a mind of Christ? What would it do to our body here at Prestoncrest? So I leave you with these questions from Henry Nouwen to contemplate and be challenged by. Did I offer peace today? Did I bring a smile to someone's face? Did I say words of healing? Did I let go of my anger and resentment? Did I forgive? Did I love? Finding time to be quiet and listen will allow you to answer those questions in the affirmative. Bless you.
Well, Jamie, thank you for joining me for this interview, and I especially appreciate your part in the special class series, Rhythms of the Inner Life. And I enjoyed your focus on listening, and I wanted to kind of pull a little bit more out of it, maybe with this interview. And I want to start by asking you, you mentioned, I thought very insightfully, that teaching a lesson often does more for the teacher than it does for those who are being taught. I completely agree with that from my own experience. But with that in mind, what would you say was maybe the most significant lesson you learned by teaching about listening?
Well, it's a topic I've taught on before, and something that I have learned in the last 5 or 6 years is important to me and my mental and spiritual health. And so, as you know, teaching produces 20 or 30 minutes of a lesson that somebody hears, but there's hours of study and preparation that go into it.
Yeah.
And it's that study and preparation that typically reinforces something you already knew. And so for me, it was just nice to be affirmed studying again why listening is important, for me, for sure. And so it reinforced feelings I've had in the past and things I believe are important.
Yeah. I know from my own experience, just all you generate when you study for a class or something you're going to teach, so much of it you don't use, but it shapes who you are. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, I'm sure just preparing a teaching a class about listening would probably highlight your own desperate need and my own desperate need, I know, for listening ourselves. You know, we begin our lives, when you think about it, as listeners. I have grandchildren now, and one of my grandchildren is far beyond listening now. You know, she's full of energy and she's heavy into talking. I have another one that's not quite learned how to talk yet, so she's listening a lot. And children learn how to talk by listening. But something you said in the class, you said, as we grow older, listening seems to become more difficult. And I don't think that means our ears stop working. I'm just curious what you mean by that. Why does this happen as we grow older? Why is listening kind of tamped down a little bit?
Well, I'm hoping that as I get older and I'm seeing in my life, getting better at listening. But when I stated that, I thought of a time in the last 5 to 10 years in middle adulthood where, for whatever reason, you think you have something that, you know, when you discover something for the first time, you think others haven't discovered it. And so you want to share, you know, whatever it is. And that so much of that happens between the ages of 25 and 35 or 40. That seemed to be the time in my life when I talked so much more than I listened. And now as I'm, you know, 50 and more, listening is more important. But I'm also in a career that I have to listen for a living. So I ask a lot of questions just so I can listen and learn. But I do find myself, you know, talking more than I want to. And sometimes the audience dictates how much you talk or how much you think you need to talk. A younger generation, maybe I feel like I have more to share. And then when I listen to them, I think I could have learned more just asking questions and listening to them. I think it's a mixture of phase of life makes it more difficult or impacts, and then the audience that you're with impacts how much we listen or talk.
That's good insight. It's almost like it's a season when you're very, very young, you have no idea what's going on. And then you mature to where you think you know everything that's going on. And then you finally get to the point where you realize you know some of what's going on, and you don't have to be the star of the show all the time. I remember hearing Dallas Willard was teaching a class, and he had been a professor for 40 years, and someone asked him a pointed question, and it was kind of designed to show him up. And Dallas Willard listened, and he said, well, I think this is probably a good time for us to end the class, and we'll pick it up tomorrow. And someone came up to him and said, why did you do that? I mean, you could have demolished this young man. He said, well, I'm trying to practice spiritual discipline of not having the last word. And I thought, wow, what maturity and what humility to be that way.
For sure.
You know, you asked this question, you said, probably one of the most important questions you asked, what did listening look like in the life of Jesus? And when you said that, I thought about how most of my life, or a lot of my life, I had missed the value of what you asked there. What did listening look like in the life of Jesus? Because I guess I thought of Jesus primarily as a speaker, one who was teaching by speaking. But he was also, as you said, a listener. And he was teaching by his example, and we can watch him listening to God, quietly being in God's presence. And so just to answer that question, what do you think it looked like in his life, listening?
Well, I in my mind, I picture the time that he was listening is when he was in solitude. I'm sure that he was listening when he was amongst, you know, smaller groups, but the most vivid pictures to me are Gethsemane, or just the time he retreated from groups to be alone is when I pictured him listening.
I appreciated one of your points that you made. Just to be fair, you said the demands that were made upon Jesus' time were just as insistent and just as unrelenting as the demands that are made upon us today. And so while it's true that our lives are very full and they're very busy, they're very stressed, I appreciated one of your questions. You said, in view of the fact of all the crowds that were pressing on Jesus, you said, do we have any sense in him of a hurried spirit or a hectic nature? And of course, the answer was obvious. It was no. And so how could that be? How could Jesus go through the crush of activity of life and still not seem hurried?
Oh, I think certainly comes from his peace and understanding of what his purpose was. I don't know that he ever questioned why he was here. So he was dialed into what life meant for him, what he was called to be a part of. And I have to imagine felt comfortable feeling he was living that out. So that removes pressure and chaos. And I try to think, what is it about my life that the pressure and chaos make it feel hectic? Is competing priorities or competing desires make me feel more hectic. And I notice that when I am more dialed in spiritually, I sense that peace and calm as well. But I think his lack of leading a hectic life goes to one of the other questions we're going to talk about is the rhythm of his life. Yeah. He understood the importance of that.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you that question because in your class, you talked about this rhythm he had, and the way you put it, you said he was moving always from larger groups to smaller groups. I think you said intimate groups, and finally one-to-one, and then alone with God. Talk a little bit more about that rhythm that I think you're right. That may be why we don't sense that hurried spirit in him.
Well, I think if you look at that, none of those dominated his life. It wasn't 80% public and 20% alone. It was such a balance that he understood the importance of that rhythm. The public life drained him. The smaller groups and time alone filled him. And it keeps it, it keeps the balance in line spiritually, physically, and emotionally. I had best boss I ever had, the first boss I had out of college. And he said to me, I need you to be a 10 at home so that you can be a 10 at work. And he understood that a hectic, chaotic life at home was going to impact my performance at work. And he appreciated the fact that a hectic, chaotic work life was going to impact my life at home.
Wow.
And that advice guided me through other jobs to stay or leave. When I saw the job or family life impacting one or the other, I made choices to move on because that balance was out of whack, for a better way of putting it.
Yeah. And that rhythm you described when the crush of people to, one of my favorite scriptures is in Mark chapter 9. It says, Jesus did not want anyone to know where they were. And that told me it's okay to hide sometimes, but they were. He was with the 12. He'd gotten to a smaller group. And then there was those special three one of my friends said that Jesus chose 12, focused on 3, and graduated 11. And that was his focus. He picked a group and stayed with them, and it got intimate sometimes. And then that one-to-one time with God. And so this commitment to God and commitment to people, that rhythm back and forth, moving through those layers of relationship. You described that what you call pathways or paths to discovering the discipline of listening. And you introduced several scriptures, and we don't have time to talk about all of them, but I want to ask you about one story, biblical story you mentioned. And then there was another scripture that came to my mind while you were talking. But the story you mentioned is in Luke 10, and it's Jesus in the home of Mary and Martha. And it says Martha was worried and distracted about many things, but Mary was carefully listening. And I like what you said. You said Mary gets it. And I want to ask you, what was it that she got? And what was it that Martha didn't get, do you think?
And we have the luxury of 2020 vision. I assume she got it. We can say she got it because obviously she took advantage of what was in front of her. She saw, she heard the whisper of God, and she may have been a really hospitality-focused woman that thought that was important, but she understood what was in front of her and the ability to sit at the feet of Jesus and spend time with him in some form or fashion. So that's why I say she got it. Her sister may have had the same love and concern for Jesus, and at the moment felt that serving him in a proper hospitality way and caring about those things was important to her. It was a matter of two different, approaches.
Yeah. Yeah. I think Jesus actually said, you got it, because he said, Mary has chosen what is better.
Yeah.
Now, he didn't say, Martha, you're doing the wrong thing. It wasn't right and wrong. It was good and better. And sometimes that's our choice. We have to kind of stop the good things so we can do something better. And I think that's what Mary got. And one text that I thought about listening when you were talking is Jesus would often say, after he would teach something to a crowd, he would say, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Almost proverbial, like it was some little quip and quote that was out there. And I wanted to talk a little bit about what that may have meant. And as you hear him say that, he would say it often after a parable. And he would finish, he'd look at the crowd, he who has ears to hear, let him hear. Wonder what he meant by that.
Oh, when I hear that, I just think it's a moment of emphasis of he who has ears, let him hear. This is important. Consume this, process this. What does it mean to you? So just in some form or fashion, a moment of take the time to process what I've said.
Right.
What is there? What does it mean to you?
Yeah.
An attention getter.
Yeah. And it's clearly it's about listening.
Right.
I've often wondered also if he may be saying, I know some of y'all aren't going to get this, but some of you will. He who has ears to hear, do you have the right kind of apparatus? And not just the ears, but what words, what's behind them, what's going inside your mind and your heart? Are you letting it get in? If you have that kind of hearing, that kind of listening, then you'll get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's been interesting interviewing these teachers in this series because there are some common themes that just keep coming back up. And it's come up in your class as well. And that theme that's kind of foundational in this series is just what happens when we just simply stop, slow down, and pause. And as I think back through some of the teachers I've interviewed, one of them described it. They said it happens when you, quote, make space for God. You clear out the room, you create some unaccounted for space. It's left open for God. Another teacher said it's what happens when you slow down. Another teacher said it's when you discover silence and solitude. And then another said it's when you learn to meditate and reflect. And I think we're all saying the same thing. And I really like the way you put it. You said, and I wrote this down, this is a quote. You said, this is available to us when we learn and take the time to listen to him. And you highlighted several scriptures, especially from 1 Corinthians 2, that when things are available to us, you said, here's what you gain. You gain the Spirit of God. You gain the mind of Christ. You gain God's wisdom. Those are all phrases out of that chapter. You quoted verse 10 that said, these are things God has revealed to us by Spirit. God is the initiator, and I'm there listening. And then you also quoted verse 14 that said, we cannot understand because they are discerned only by the Spirit. And you said all this is available to us, if I can go back to how you put it, when we choose to listen. And so much seems to be riding on the fact that we choose to quietly and attentively listen to God. And so it's so vital. So why is it so difficult sometimes for us to just stop, pause? Why is it so hard to learn and practice listening? What are the obstacles?
Oh, I think it is a mixture of things. And early in my career, the first 15 or 20 years of my career, I had all kinds of free time in my job. And I found myself not as disciplined as you would think I would be. And now the last 10 years of my career have been chaotic and hectic and full of pressure. And so I can see both sides, that too much freedom, we don't make time to be alone. We think we'll get to it eventually. But you can be so busy that you don't make time to be alone. But at the end of the day, for me personally, whether it's the discipline of listening or study or prayer or whatever, those all seem to slip through my fingers when I'm comfortable.
Mm.
And when I am not allowing or pushing myself to follow his lead or be guided by his Spirit, but when I settle into a physical comfort, those things seem to fade away.
Mm.
And I get a little nervous in saying that, because the other side of that sounds like the only time we can grow is when we're under stress or in chaos or times are difficult. I'm not saying that, although certainly so much growth comes from those times. But it does seem that the times that I don't spend in those disciplines is when I'm most comfortable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think the last thing I wanted to ask you about, you made a real interesting point that you said listening, and you meant listening to God, involves sometimes community. And we can help each other listen to God. And it reminded me, at one point I ran across a little study of words, and it's pointed out the difference between two words, individual and person. And I guess I'd always thought of those as synonyms. But it said that the word individual is a pretty new word, and it means not divisible. It means one. It means me, by myself. But the word person is an ancient word, and it means face to face. It's saying, I cannot be a person without you. And it's reminding us that God built it into our DNA, relationships. From the very beginning, he said, it's not good for anyone to be alone. And you find out who you are, and we help each other grow, as you said in your class. We help each other listen in community. And I remember going on a retreat with you up in the mountains, and there were two parts to that retreat. There was solitude with God, and then at the end of the day, there was community. And that solitude was amazing, finding some high place on a rock to spend the day. But the powerful time was at the end of the day when we all got together and we shared, here's what happened to me today. And in that discussion, we were helping each other learn how to listen to God. And so maybe one final question is, what would it look like for a community to help each other listen to God?
Well, to me, helping one another listen to God only works when we know one another. If you're asking me, I think the specific thing I said was, when you're trying to make a decision and you're praying to God for direction, involve friends to help you with that, to say, here's the question I'm facing. I'm looking for an answer. Would you pray with me and listen on your own time? Do you hear God saying something about the path I should take? And I think that person is more equipped to listen well for you when they know you, when they know your goals, when they know your heart, when they know your fears and struggles, especially because they can help you overcome those when you may think you don't have what it takes to move forward with whatever direction God is calling you. So to me, the listening in community, we have to start with the relationship of building that with one another.
Yeah. Well, I'll close with something you said also, that it really takes courage to listen, because God's going to pull us out into the light, and if that's where he talks to us. And well, thank you. I've enjoyed this so much, and I appreciate your class and appreciate this interview, and I look forward to learning more from you, and hope God gives you a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Bob. Love you.
Love you too, brother.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.